Welcome! In this series of videos, we will look at software add-ons for both the PowerBasic Console and Windows compilers. Today we will look at enhancing our web development by passing parameters to our web page, which is hosted on an Abyss web server from Aprelium in conjunction with the PowerBasic Console compiler. This was our website at the end of the last video. We've taken a flat text file which sits on our web server and we've displayed it in a web page using a cascading style sheet. However, our CGI application is hard-coded at the moment to display a single file. What we're going to do today is we're going to pass parameters on our URL, and this will allow the CGI program to display a completely separate file. So let's have a look at our code. In our application, we're calling three libraries at the beginning of the code. The standard Windows 32 API include, which comes with PowerBasic. We're including also in the libraries folder a pbcgi include file. Now this particular file does actually ship with PowerBasic in the samples folder. And our final include file is one for our standard file handling routines. So at the moment when our pb main function executes, it calls this single function, createWebPage v4. This function is hard-coded to take a template. It then passes control to a getUserList function, and the getUserList function is hard-coded to display a myfile.csv. Today we've added a second file, myfile2.csv. While the first file has a number of columns, the second file is now added an extra column. We have added a balance column, so we now have two separate files which we will copy onto the web server. So how do we pass the information on our URL to tell the web server to display the other file? Well, in our pb main function, this is where we need to make some changes. We need to create some local variables to accept the parameter or parameters coming in on the URL. The first variable will be to accept the incoming URL. We're then going to declare an array for our parameters, and this array will contain each of the individual parameters. We'll then have another variable to keep track of the parameter count. How many variables are we actually getting coming in on the URL? Using that information, we're going to determine which file to display to the user on their web page. And finally, a standard row counter. So we're going to make use of one of the inbuilt functions from the PBI CGI library. This will effectively read from the incoming message. The read CGI function, which is in that pbcgi library, will allow us to pick up the content of the URL, and we'll put that into the str input variable. And we'll make use of another function within that library, parse parameters. This will allow us to take the parameters that have come in our input variable and place them within the str parameter array. It returns a long to tell us how many parameters that have actually come in. So if a user actually connects with no parameters, the value of this will be 0. If they connect with 5 parameters, then it will be 5. Having determined that, we can then check to see how many parameters we have actually received. So if the number of parameters is greater than 0, we can then handle each of the parameters, and if the number of parameters is 0, then we know no parameters have come in. So if no parameters have come in, we're going to default to the standard myfile.csv. And if the number of parameters is greater than 0, we can then look at each parameter individually. We can do that quite simply with a for next loop, stepping through each element that's contained within the parameter array. Now for today, there is only going to be one parameter, and we're going to make use of yet another function within that pbcgi library to decode what that parameter actually is. Parameters, of course, can be formed from two parts: the name of the parameter, an equal sign, and then the value of the parameter. This naming of parameters can be quite useful if you're not entirely certain the order of the parameters coming in. For today, the single parameter we're going to be passing in will be the name of the file we wish the application to display to the user on the web page. So we're not going to be doing naming today, we'll leave that for a later video. So now that we've determined the name of the file to load, we we can then go ahead and pass that information on to the next function. So the value of our variable is the name of the file we wish to load. And we'll pass that to our createWebPage function. Our createWebPage function needs to accept that as an incoming parameter. This webpage function is the one that loads the template. This defines the look of our web page, and it then calls the getUserList function to populate that template. Now we're going to create a new userList function to accept our new file. So we'll just clone the existing function and we'll rename it. So this is our getUserList version 3 function. It accepts a single parameter, which is the name of the file that we wish to display on the web page. And further down the code, where we had hard-coded the name of the file, we can take that out and we can put in the variable which contains the file name. So having done that, that should complete the changes to our application. So let's just compile it to make sure we haven't made any errors. And it compiles quite cleanly. So if we take our new Demo 3 application and we copy that onto the website. And in our data folder, I have already placed the myfile2.csv. This is the new file we're going to call. Now the application as it's set up at the moment will accept either no parameters, in which case it will default to myfile.csv, or it will accept a single parameter, which is going to be the name of the file to display. So if we go into our web browser and we change this to Demo 3 and run the application. Now since we didn't give it any parameters, it's displaying the original file, which is fine. If we want to put the name of the new file in, we put that in with a question mark after the demo3.exe. So the file we're going to load is myfile2.csv. And as you'll see, this is quite dynamically showing our new file, because we now have the new balance column. If we give it a file that doesn't exist, for example file 3, it will give us a no data page. So our CGI application is quite happily accepting parameters on the URL. This will give you considerable flexibility to expand your application. However, what if your application doesn't work properly and you need to do some debugging? As the CGI application is running on another computer, this can make debugging a little tricky. However, there is a workaround you can use to make life easier for yourself. If we go back to the main application, at the beginning of the program, we read in the URL to this variable. One thing you can do is use the writeCGI function to display a temporary web page to allow you to see the value of variables. If we use this construct, where we're calling writeCGI with a very simplistic web page comprising of an HTML opening and an HTML closing tag, and in the middle we're putting the value of the variable we wish to display on the screen. Immediately after writing to this, we use the exit function so the application terminates. So if we compile that now, and we'll copy that onto our web server, and we will go back to our browser and we will run this once more. So what it should do, it should display the value of our URL parameters, which it does indeed. It's passing back myfile3.csv, which is our parameter list. So you can use this technique at any point of your CGI application to write out information back to the web page, which is called the CGI program in the first place. Always remembering to exit the function immediately after. This gives you a way of actually debugging your application if you've got something large and complex in your CGI app. So today we've taken a CGI application and we've passed it a single parameter. However, the code as it stands will allow you to pass many parameters. But we'll leave that for the next video. That's it for today. Thank you for watching.